Hey there. Hey guys. Let me know, type a comment so I know you can hear. Is the sound okay? Hey Alessandra. Hey Brandy. Hey Jill. Can you guys hear everything okay? Renee says yes. Sound is good. Perfect. I'm gonna give just a couple minutes for a few other people to get in here. I got your email, Brandy. I am gonna answer you. Just forgive me if I'm a little slow. Perfect. Okay. So, hey Fonda. So, last week was our first class. We worked through chapter 1, and we kind of left things off with homework. And your homework was to, 1, find your sacred space, create your sacred space. 2, we talked about meditation and sitting in the power. And your homework was to not only create your space to work in, but to practice the concept of sitting in the power. I gave you some resources for those who had maybe didn't have some the best of luck self-guiding. So, given what we talked about, laying a foundation, making a daily practice to connect with spirit, practicing sitting in the power, everything that we talked about since last week, I want to start off before we get into this week's lesson with your questions. Did you guys have questions about what we went over last week? Did questions come up for you as you were exploring your homework? Was there anything you needed clarity about? Hey, Tiffany. No questions? Nobody yet? Everything was clear? We're good? We're copacetic? Jill says, no questions other than, is it cool to use music if we feel it works for us during meditation? Yes. The only caution that I have around using music is because when we work for spirit, we work from a specific state of mind, or we're working in alpha brain waves. If we become too dependent on a particular piece of music, so if you're just using music in general, that's fine. Some might use a particular song or a particular piece of music or a particular CD, and it's almost like they train their body. That kind of acts like a trigger for them to go into that state, and then they find that they have a hard time getting into that state without the trigger of the music. That's the only caution that I would have. So it looks like everyone else is pretty good as far as questions, as far as understanding, comprehending what we went over last week. This week's lesson is, so Jill says, yes, it's my trigger. Now, if you can, without your music, hear that music within your mind, generate that music, the memory sound of that music within your mind as your trigger, and not need the physical hard copy of the CD or the MP3 or whatever it is, then that's fine. But I would encourage you to, you might even try every time you sit, turning the volume down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until you don't need it. Heather, what's an easy way to switch on and off to do a reading? We're going to talk about that, actually. I don't know that we're quite into that particular chapter yet, but we are going to talk about that. The biggest thing, though, is intention, and I will come back to that. So this week, we're going to work through chapter 2 and we're going to work through a big chunk of chapter 3 if you're following along with the To Touch the Soul book by Judith Rochester. And the first chapter is all about our channels, essentially. It's okay, Heather. And hopefully, I'm hoping that she addresses it in the book. If she doesn't, I'll address it personally. I just am afraid, like, if I address it now, I just don't want to mix people up and get too far ahead of ourselves. So the loose outline that we're using, Heather, is a book called To Touch the Soul. It's by Rev Judith Rochester. She's a Lilydale medium, and if you want the book, you can get that on Amazon. If not, like I said, I'm going to be taking through each chapter each week. I'll be going through it thoroughly. I'll be putting my own 2 cents in, so it's not necessary, but if you want it, that's the book, and that's where you can get it. So this week's, or the first part of this week's class is about your spiritual channels. And what I mean by that is when we're learning to open up and connect and communicate with spirit, we receive those impressions through our psychic channels. And our psychic channels are sort of spiritual mirrors or spiritual counterparts to our physical senses. For example, we have our physical sight and we have our spiritual sight, which we call clairvoyance. Clair meaning clear, voyant meaning sight, see, like voyeurism. And so for most people, those are going to be images within the mind's eye, impressions within the mind. That's called subjective clairvoyance. That's how most people work. There is objective clairvoyance, which is when we actually literally see or perceive something with our eyes that other people cannot see. But 99% of people work and perceive subjectively. And so that's how we're going to be working until maybe a little bit later when we do some practices sort of objectively seeing the aura. So we have our physical sight and our spiritual sight. We have our physical sense of hearing, and we have clairaudience. Clair, it's French. Clair meaning clear, audience, auditory, hearing. And so I kind of liken clairaudience to, we talk about the mind's eye with clairvoyance. Clairaudience is sort of like the mind's ear. So if I were to tell you to hear in your head, Mary had a little lamb, you could probably hear Mary had a little lamb playing in your head. You're not literally externally hearing the music, but you're still hearing the music. That's where our clairaudient perceptions take place. Then we have Clairsentience, which is our feeling, our gut feeling, our intuition, our emotional intelligence. And so sometimes it comes through in a way where we're sensing it within our body, that some people might call more of an empathic sense. Other times it's more of sort of an emotional mirroring, and other times it's sort of informational. I feel like this person is lying to me. I feel that there's something, that notebook that I lost is in my car. It's knowing through feeling, essentially. And then there's Cognizance, which is when you know it, you don't know how you know it, you didn't feel it, you didn't see it, you didn't hear it, you just know it in your bones. That's Cognizance. It means clear knowing. And of course there are lesser senses, such as smell and taste. You get a whiff of perfume, that your grandmother used to wear. You get the smell of it. All of a sudden you're doing a reading for someone and you taste, or it's almost like the memory of the taste of spaghetti begins to fill your awareness. So some people will break that down into what's called clairaugustance and clairaudience. Some people put those together and call them clairolfactory. I just call it smelling and tasting. And the thing about it is, if you write down these terms and learn these terminologies, that's fine. But all you really have to remember is it's seeing, feeling, hearing, and knowing. Those are the main channels that we're working from. And what I have found is that while all of us have access to all of these channels to some degree, most people have one primary sense or one primary clair, and then sort of like a secondary sense or a secondary clair that they're the most strong in. And then the other two are usually weaker. So for myself, I primarily see and feel. Most people have clairsentience as a primary channel, and that's usually paired with something else: feeling and hearing, feeling and knowing, feeling and seeing. But most people, because we are feeling beings by nature, clairsentience seems to be the easiest one for most people to grasp. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little process to kind of help you get used to using and sensing through those spiritual counterparts, or through those clair senses. So what I want you to do is, as long as you're in a safe place to do so, get comfortable. We talked about things like position and posture and stuff for meditation. As long as you're in a safe space to meditate, I want you to get into a comfortable position. And I want you to close your eyes. And we'll just start by taking a few deep breaths in through the nose. Out through the mouth. Letting all your muscles relax. Softening the muscles in the face and the neck. Feeling your shoulders soften. Feeling the muscles in your back and your abdomen let loose. Allowing the hips to relax, the legs to relax. Allowing your feet to relax. Letting your breaths become slower, longer. If thoughts come to mind, just recognize them and let them go. Bring your awareness back to your breath and back to the sound of my voice. And I'm going to take us through the different senses, but however you perceive is completely okay. So whatever I give you, don't feel like you have to perceive it exactly as I say. Conceptualize the intent. Conceptualize the command. Knowing that there's no right or wrong way for you to perceive the subtle realms. But as you breathe, I want you to become aware of the lights. The light of spirit that is within all things. Become aware of your own light, your own soul, your own spirit, your own divine essence. And within your inner awareness, I want you to perceive, however you do, the divine light that exists outside of you within all things. And see it drawing near to you. And I want you to feel the sensation. Feel how good it feels to be held in this divine state. To feel the energy of this divine presence, this energy that's all around you, within you. And within this light, you can feel the presence of the divine. You can feel the presence of your higher guides, spirit guides, helpers, loved ones. You might not know who they are, but you can sense the presence of spirit all around you. And with your next breath, I want you to take your awareness to that blank screen within your mind's eye. And I want you to see or perceive, visualize, however you conceptualize a rose. And there's going to be times where it feels like you're making it up, and I'm giving you permission to completely be in your imagination here. So notice everything that you notice about this rose. We're using our inner sight to view this rose. Notice its color. Notice the texture of the petals. Notice the leaves. Notice the bloom. Notice all the details of the stem. Move your awareness around this rose. Look at it from all angles. Are there any defining characteristics? What is the color? Is there more than one? Does the stem have thorns, or is it smooth? Are the petals plush, or are they wilted? And now I want you to feel into the rose. Imagine that you're pushing your light, that you're extending your awareness into that rose. And I want you to notice, what feelings does this rose give you? Or what feelings arise within your body, within your emotions, as you perceive this rose? Describe them. Put words to those feelings. With your next breath, I want you to listen to the rose, and I want you to notice anything that you hear in your thoughts, anything that you hear in your mind's ear. It could be a sound from nature, it could be a word, a song. Just listen to this rose. What do you hear? And if you don't hear anything, make yourself perceive a sound, the first sound that comes to mind, and claim it. Now I want you to imagine that you're smelling the rose, and just let those spiritual olfactory senses get the sense of how this rose smells. And on one of the flowers, on the bud, is a small drop of dew. And I want you to imagine that you are tasting that drop of water, and just notice in your mind, in your imagination, your perceptions, what that drop of dew tastes like. And now as you look at that rose, Spirit is going to give you a message. It's a message that's personal to you, but just let yourself perceive the rose entirely. Let yourself know that rose. Bring back to your awareness, seeing it, hearing it, feeling it, tasting it, smelling it all at once. What message is the rose giving you? As you gaze upon it, as you listen to it, as you taste it, what does it tell you? And maybe a thought comes to mind, or a memory comes to mind. Maybe the rose begins to change. Maybe you become hyper aware of its color, and that has a message for you. And it's going to feel like you're making it up because you know your own life, but make it up. if you need to. Because when you give yourself permission to be fully in the right brain without caring whether you're right or wrong, then you're truly connected to spirit. Get your message. Thank that light. Thank the presence of spirit that's around you. And then use your breath to begin to bring your awareness back to you. And then we're going to talk about the process that we just did. So if you need a minute, I know I talked last week about keeping a notebook. If you need to write down not only what you perceived, but how you perceived it, take a minute to do so. But, questions. Do any of you have questions about the sense process that we just did? What you saw, what you experienced, why you saw, or felt, or heard, or sensed, or smelled what you did? Let me know, we'll talk about it. And while we're waiting for those questions, this is also going to give you a sense of what channel is easiest for you to perceive from. If it was easier for you to see and visualize that rose, then you're probably going to be predominantly clairvoyant. If you were very in tune to how it made you feel or emotions that came to mind, you're going to be predominantly clairsentient. If you could hear very easily, predominantly clairaudient. If it was just a sensation of knowing as we were going through the process, then it was predominantly claircognizant for you. Now, in regards to your channels, I know that I mentioned that most people have a primary channel, their primary clair that they're the best at, or at least a top two that they're the best at. Like I see and feel. In the beginning, work with your strengths. So if hearing and taste are your two strongest senses, then that's what I want you to focus on going through this course. As we get deeper into the course, and as you get deeper into your own practices, then I want you to focus on your weaknesses. For example, hearing does not come naturally to me. I've had to work to get information in an auditory way, and I still to this day have to make myself really work harder than usual to get information clairaudiently, but I try to at least make myself in every session that I do get at least a couple pieces of information or a name or whatever in an auditory sense, because I want you to be the best and most well-rounded sensitives you can be and not fall into a trap of just doing what you know, because then what happens is you end up falling into a stylistic rut. Jill says, so it's about practicing receiving symbols and also defining strongest clairs. Yeah, that's what this 2 class is about. We haven't quite gotten onto symbolism yet. If with the rose there were some changes that took place there, you may have already gotten some of the start of symbolism, but right now we're really just working on getting used to how we perceive the information. Good, Tiffany. Okay, so that was pretty self-explanatory. Like, that was a pretty easy process. Most of you were able to perceive something. So this kind of leads us into, well, I will say this. In the outline of the book, the author touches briefly on spirit guides, and I'm not going to get into that yet. I think that she included sort of opening yourself up to the light of spirit and sensing this presence of the spirit world to get us on the track of understanding that spirit can dictate those psychic perceptions that we're perceiving. And because when we receive mediumistic information, it's coming through our psychic channels, and we're developing psychically and mediumistically simultaneously when we're focusing on mediumship. That being said, I think sometimes it can be a disservice to just simply say, okay, we're going to do something quick and rush with the guide. I'm going to get much more in depth with spirit guides at a later point. There's a Scottish medium by the name of Gordon Smith who said something that I really loved. He said one time in a lecture he was giving, he never understood when a spiritual teacher would say, sit down and find your guide. What we should really be telling people is to sit down and find yourself. And that's why in the first class we started with a firm foundation of meditation, because if you don't recognize you and know yourself and what you feel like, how the hell are you supposed to discern information that comes from a spirit source or from a guide, and discern that from your own imagination? So this is where we go into symbolism. Alessandra, I see she has a question about hearing. She goes, I know this is specific, but I suffer from tinnitus in an ear and it makes me get out of meditation. I can't see the rest of what she wrote in that particular section without disrupting the live, but then it says, any ideas on how to get over the buzzing sound in my ear? Yeah, so when we are clairaudient, or people who are naturally clairaudient, it's not uncommon that they'll feel a pressure in the ear. It's not uncommon that they'll hear a buzzing or a ringing in the ear. And that can be a twofold in what's going on. So I tend to think of it as this. Partially, if you think of yourself as a medium, we are instruments, and instruments need tuned, which is why we're doing development. Sometimes when you're receiving that ringing or buzzing or pressure, it's your guides and your helpers that work with you, almost like adjusting you or tuning you. If you were a piano or a violin, you're being tuned. Other times there's information sort of woven into those auditory frequencies that your body is receiving. My advice is also twofold. One, I have found it helpful if I have a ringing in the ear, and for most people it's the right ear. It's sometimes called the spirit ear, but not necessarily so, especially if it's more subjective, internal in how we're perceiving it, is to simply close my eyes and take a few deep breaths in, and as I breathe in, I almost imagine like I'm a sponge and the tonal sound is the water, and I'm just absorbing it. I'm sucking it into myself. And usually within minutes of doing that, it stops. The other thing too, and we'll talk about this when we talk about spirit guides, but we have a guide that's known as a chemist. And the job of the chemist is to regulate the chemistry of the body, because there are certain biological and physiological changes that we go through when we shift into a mediumistic state. And so even if you don't know who your chemist is or any of your guides, because we haven't gotten to that yet, you can simply say, okay, guides, I'm getting this as a tuning, or a tone. I want to receive what you're bringing to me, but can you please tweak that, adjust that, find a way that I can still receive the benefit of that adjustment or that tweaking, so to speak, without the irritation of the actual tone. So now we're going to talk about symbolism. Now, I know I've talked about as we develop mediumistically, we develop our psychic side. In America, we tend to do it backwards. We tend to develop psychically first and then move into the mediumistic connection. But here we're focusing on mediumship, so if you don't have previous psychic experience, you're going to be simultaneously working those psychic channels and developing those psychic channels. Now, when we are developing mediumship, we're not at message work yet, but what we're striving towards is moving towards being able to give a message to someone else that is evidential in nature. And what I mean by evidential is evidence is probably the most important piece of the process, because evidence are those things that are so highly specific that the sitter knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're connecting with the person that you say you're connecting with. So it's the concrete facts. He drove a 1968 Chevy Nova. He always clipped his toenails on the kitchen sink. Or, it's like those oddly specific things. So there's the evidence and there's the message. Now, psychic ability, is the language of symbolism. Symbolism is the language of energy, which is what psychics do. We're interpreting energy. And with mediumship, when we're doing the evidence portion, what we see, perceive, feel is usually literal. The symbolic aspect usually comes into play when we shift from evidence into the message, which is the I love yous, the I'm sorries, the your job's gonna come, those sorts of things. So we establish through evidence who we are communicating with, and then we move into why has the communicator come. And it's usually where you're going to find symbolism. You know, if you're working psychically, you're going to work with symbolism a lot. When you are giving evidence, it's going to be mostly what you see, feel, sense, or hear, has literal implications. And then as we shift into the message, that's where we get more into symbolism. So symbolism is important, and it can help you in your mediumship. I recommend that every person who is taking their development seriously go and get two things. A thesaurus and a dream dictionary. Because for those of you who are clairsentient, like myself, we want to advance our vocabulary, because a lot of it is emotion, a lot of it is feeling, if we have a very strong clairsentient link. And so we want to move beyond happy, sad, angry. We want to beef up our vocabulary, because if I were to say to you that someone was feeling melancholy and someone was incredibly distraught and melancholy are both a sad energy, but they imply very different things. And when we become really masterful with our language, it can take our contacts and our communications that we relay to our sitters from here to here. So start learning to enhance your vocabulary, and spirit can then work with that. The reason that I suggest getting a dream dictionary is because essentially all a dream dictionary is a dictionary of symbols. And what we're going to do is we're going to start building our symbolism. We're going to start building our symbol bank, because our spirit guides can't use anything that we don't know, because as mediums we are an intermediary, we're instruments. The communication is being filtered through us, and so they have to learn to use what's our guides use what's in our awareness to bring the point to the surface, to bring the concept of what's trying to be conveyed to the surface. And so that takes a lot of energy. Now, sometimes a spirit guide can draw something from our own frame of experience that there's a parallel to with what's trying to be conveyed. And that's great, but that takes a lot of energy. It's much easier for them to flash a symbol and for you to know what that symbol means. It saves energy, and it makes the process that much more efficient, especially as you're learning to build power, because there's not a lot of power to sustain a link in those early days. So symbolism can help you a lot, whether you're working psychically or giving the message portion mediumistically. There's two types of symbolisms. There's universal symbolism and there's personal symbolism. Universal symbolisms are those symbols that cross cultures. For example, if we all saw a symbol of a phone with a circle and an X through it, we understand intuitively, we know this is a no cell phone area. If we see a dove, that's peace. If we see a shamrock, we all can deduce that that means luck. So those are universal symbolisms. And when we start working with symbolism and our guides, those are the symbols that's easy for us to understand because they're universal in nature. However, if you want to get better at what you do, you have to develop your specific personal symbolism. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit more later down the road when we start talking about evidence and identifying who's coming through and that sort of thing. Sometimes spirit will, as I said, use things from your own frame of reference as a symbol, or they'll use things from pop culture as a symbol. You're connecting with the man, I see George Clooney. Is that a symbol that this guy's name is George? Is that a symbol that he looked like George Clooney? And so one exercise that I think is healthy is getting, like I said, that symbol dictionary or a list of some symbols, and then sitting down and just inviting, becoming aware of that spiritual light around you, becoming aware of the presence of spirit around you, and then going through each symbol and asking spirit, what does this mean for me? So you might have a key. What does a key mean for me? Is it opening doors? Is it new opportunities? Now this is where we start to get a little bit more into universal symbolism. Something like a key might be a little bit more universal. However, if I showed you the symbolism of a snake, now if my brother and I were both doing development, and my brother's, I love him, but he's about as psychic as a paper bag. If I saw a snake, to me, that would be a fear. That would be someone who's slimy. That would be, watch out, there's a snake in the grass. That would be, I hate snakes. They terrify me. They freak me out. When something moves and it doesn't have legs, it's not natural. It's creepy. I don't like it. That's me. My brother bred pythons. So if he saw the snake, he might see it as, oh, I see this, and for me, this represents a business opportunity. Or this represents shedding your old skin, shedding away what doesn't serve you anymore. So how we feel about those visual containers, which is essentially what a symbol is, it's a container for the essence of a concept, is going to be how our guides use them in a way that's unique to us. So go through with different symbols and ask, okay, what might this mean for me? What might this mean for me? It doesn't mean you're going to use all those symbolisms or that your guides are going to use all those symbols, but you're building almost like a bank, a reservoir for your guides and for your higher self to draw on when you are giving information, when you're giving messages. Another way of approaching it that I think is helpful is doing the reverse. So you've given your guide a symbol and you've said, okay, what does this mean for us? Next, I think what can be really helpful to kind of take that to the next level is to give your guide a concept and then ask your guide for a symbol. So I want the concept. I'm thinking of the concept of illness. Guide, what symbol is going to be our symbol for illness? I'm thinking of the concept of a promotion. Give me a symbol that embodies promotion and see what they give you. Does that make sense? So sometimes you are giving spirit the symbol and asking for the meaning. Another way of approaching it, and I think both are helpful, is give spirit the essence of a concept and let them give you the visual symbol. And I work a lot with symbolism. Symbolism is really helpful. Now, if there's anything at all, if you're not big on symbols, then even if you're not incredibly visual, I think that every single person should learn the symbolism of colors and should learn the symbolism of the chakras. Now, I know for some of you, I don't know if she gets into chakras in these books. I may talk a little bit about them later. However, the old spiritualists didn't talk about chakras. They didn't know your root from your crown. The only time I've really ever heard a reference to chakras in old spiritualist teachings, like from the 1800s, early 1900s, is you might hear a reference to the solar plexus. That's about it. A little bit later on, you might have a reference to the third eye, but those Eastern influences didn't come in till the hippies in the 60s. So, however, whether you believe in them literally, or if you want to believe in them as a symbol, the chakras, if you understand colors, you can kind of understand the chakras, and if you can understand chakras, you kind of understand the meaning of colors. So, simply for the sake of time, because there's other meditations, I'm not going to do this color meditation that I wanted to do with you, but one thing kind of very similar from the symbol processes that is part of your homework is to start working on your symbols, is to sit, and what I want you to do is, we all know Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. It's the 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 colors of those chakra systems, is to sit and imagine that you're just bathed in that color. So we're bathed in red. As I am bathed in red, what do I feel? what emotions come to mind, what memories come to mind, how do I feel red in my body? Does it bring up any memories? Does it bring up, what does red embody? What is the essence of red to me? And then go through orange and yellow and green and blue and purple, white, black, and get a sense of color. Because you can look at a person, and I can look at the aura, and I don't even have to look at it objectively. I can get a flash of color. I can hold the intention of looking at this person's aura, and I'll get a flash of color inside my mind, and immediately I know where I'm starting at, because I'm looking at the color. The first color that I perceive, I know for me, the way my system is set up, is immediately what's going on in a person's life. So if I see this color and I'm looking at this person, I already know what I want to start with. And then as I move deeper into it, other pieces of information unfold. So we kind of use what we know or what we learn as a framework, and then we let the voice of our own soul and the influence of our guides fill in the gap. Does that make sense? So, and you can really do this with anything that you are fluent in, which is the same thing, which I don't teach tools really, but like with divination, people think of like reading cards. You could read bones, you could read pop caps, you could read Q-tips, like it's just a tool. Symbols are a tool, albeit an internal tool, but they are a tool. So if you were really knowledgeable about birds, then you could do a whole reading simply off of birds. So I look at this person, and as I'm thinking about this person's life, a blue jay comes to mind. And as I think about this blue jay, and as I feel into this blue jay, blue is very much a color of communication. And I get the sense that this person wants to speak their truth more, but they haven't. And they want to step into that confidence to feel safe and comfortable speaking their truth. And as I think about the blue jay, and as I think about the fact that there is blue and white and black, I think about land and sky and sea, and I know that for this person, this represents them wanting to explore what they're capable of and expand their area of interest or expertise into different areas. And because the blue jay is part of the raven family, I think about the healing nature of ravens. And as I think about the healing nature of ravens, I become aware of the fact that I have a pain in my right hip. And I wonder if this person doesn't have a pain in their right hip. And I also notice that as I have a pain in my right hip, my leg begins to hurt. But as I feel into this, it doesn't feel physical, it feels emotional. And that leg represents moving forward. So this person is really wanting to move forward. This person really wants to move forward, and they're feeling as if they can't. And if you just take that first leap, you'll be able to sing your song and be loud and proud and hold yourself with a stature and a posture of confidence and contentness as the blue jay conducts itself with. Do you see how you can get a whole reading from the symbolism of a blue jay? I can do the same thing with herbs. I know a lot about the spiritual properties and the metaphysical properties of herbs. So I can look at a person and say, as I look on you, as I feel into you, I feel a deep creative energy, but I also see mugworts, which lets me know that there may be some intuitive talents. As I come over here, I feel like I want to pull inside of myself with this gentleman, and I see whorehound, which represents that he doesn't feel safe, he feels the need to protect himself. Use what you know at your disposal and add more to your reserves for your guides to draw from, and enhance your language, enhance your vocabulary. Make sense? Any questions so far? So I want to go through... Oh wait, just one more second, because I feel like there's a question, but someone's kind of afraid to ask. Now those examples that I just gave were more of a psychic nature. But as we build our attunement with the spirit world, they will be much more under spirit influence, and we can apply those to a spiritual contact or an evidential communication. And there's actually a really artful way too. I think in the beginning, the way that we focus is evidence, literal, message, symbolic. But eventually, when you become really artful at it, you can bounce between evidence and message and evidence and message and evidence and message, and weave in between those two concepts really seamlessly. And when you find a medium, none of that, Connie. When you find a medium who's really artful at doing that, it's something that's wonderful to watch. Some people just have a natural presence on stage and are very artful at platform, and you'll be able to see how they move between evidence and message, and they're actually drawing the message from the evidence itself and then going back into evidence and getting another piece of message. So the author, normally I like to do my own Travis version of these meditations, but I do want to use, and we'll kind of usually use the script from the book for some of these strengthening meditations. And like I said, I'm going to do the abridged version as I go through these. So given what we've talked about, once again, I want you to take a breath. And then close your eyes. And I want you to, at this point, we're in week 2 of many, many weeks to come, I want you to get used to taking yourself back into the meditative state. Learning to shift in and out of that awareness is important. Learning to take yourself into that state of mind is important. So use those tools of your breath and those inner senses to take you back to that space. Let yourself become aware of that light. Let yourself become aware of the presence of spirit, that great collective company. And I want you to look into your mind, and I want you to notice any mental clutter that might be interfering with your clarity. Your concerns, your worries, to-do lists. Just be aware of your mental state without trying to change it. And I want you to ask that light that you feel, that spirit company that's around you, to shine its light upon your mind. And allow that inner darkness, that inner closet, those cupboards to open to the light of spirit, to be cleansed and to be cleared. Let the spirit world organize the clutter. And allow your inner eye, your mind's eye, to be nurtured by the soothing light of spirit, that light of source. And notice how that light fills the expanse of your mind, your inner awareness, your inner vision. And let yourself feel the sensation of that process. And now I want you to become aware of any noise that interferes with your inner silence. Notice if it's you talking to yourself, if there are other voices or sounds going on in your mind. And now I want you to ask the light, those unknown guides who work with you, to pour that quiet vibration into your mind's ear, if you will. Allow yourself to hold, if only for a moment, the vibration of silence, or the lack of vibration in silence. And as abstract as this concept or this command may be, let your mind blend with the silence. In a sense, you hear the sound of silence. And how does it feel to hear the sound of nothing? And I want you to feel into your gut. I want you to literally become hyper aware of your stomach. And I want you to just check in with your body. And I want you to get a sense of the stress that you're holding. Just notice what that feels like. Use those descriptive words in your mind. And bring your awareness to your heart, and I want you to feel into the emotions that your body is holding. And again, as you observe them, you don't even have to own them, just observe them. Use those descriptive words to describe how you feel, the emotions that you're holding on to, and are these emotions that you want? And as you do so, I want you to imagine that you're opening your heart and your body to Spirit and asking them to pour the light of peace into it. So breathe in that vibration of peace and notice any shifts, as subtle as they may be, that you feel in your body. And now once more, I want you to bring your awareness back to that feeling of Spirit all around you, back to that light that is within all things, that you are bathed in. And even though we don't know who our guides are yet, you can feel those presences. You can feel the great company of the spirit world all around you as you extend your thoughts, your consciousness, your awareness out. And I want you to ask the spirit world to give you a picture. The first symbol that comes to mind, you're going to ask them for a message in the form of a picture. And notice the first image that pops to mind. Don't question it. Don't second guess it. Don't try to interpret it at this point. Interpretation comes later. Just perceive it. The first thing that comes. And now, I want you to let Spirit inspire an emotion within you. take the first emotion that comes to your mind as you mentally ask for those guides and helpers to bring an emotion or the memory of an emotion to the forefront. And now I want you to ask Spirit to give you a word. Let yourself perceive a word now. Take the first word that comes to your mind. Again, we're not worried about understanding it, just perceive it. And now a sound. You've gotten a word. Now let Spirit inspire a sound in your awareness. What is the first sound that comes to mind? Continue to breathe. Thank those Spirit influences. And with your breath, I want you to begin to bring your awareness back to you. So now you've gotten a message for yourself. Gotten an image, an emotion, a word, and a sound. And some of those may have come through a knowing. Maybe you just knew it was the word bath. You didn't see the word bath or didn't hear the word bath. It doesn't matter. But we've utilized those psychic channels to perceive several pieces of information as a message for yourself. And now your homework over this next week is to, one, as we've talked about, continue to sit in the power, continue to pray, build meditative energy. Two, begin to build your symbol banks. Get your thesaurus, get your dream dictionary, pick some symbols, allow Spirit to give you the meaning, pick some concepts, allow Spirit to give you the symbol, keep tracking it, start building up your symbol bank in your notebook. And now we've ended with you getting several pieces of information through several different Clair channels. Knowing what you know logically about what you see, but even more importantly, as you feel and sense into it, part of your homework is going to be, I've perceived these things, now I'm going to put these puzzle pieces together into a message for myself with what I know and what I've learned about the lesson that we've just had pertaining to symbolism. Make sense? And then we'll talk about it next week. So, before we wrap up here, do you guys have any questions about what we went over? Let's take a look here. While we're waiting for any questions, we'll kind of take a gander at Chapter 4. So we'll finish out anything we didn't cover from Chapter 3. So Chapter 4, I think, is where we start to focus more on spirit guides. So that will be a big chunk of next week. And then Chapter 5 moves into a little bit more natural law. We're going to be talking a little bit more about law of vibration. And if we get to it, depending on how quickly we finish Chapter 3 and move through Chapter 4, we may touch a little bit on psychometry. And I think probably psychometry will be the week after next, because when we do get to psychometry, you're going to want a partner. So that's something that you're going to want to plan for, to have someone to practice with. So you feel like you're absorbing. Yeah, it's a lot. And when I start talking, I feel very influenced by my own spirit teachers when I teach, and they kind of like my going off on my little tangent about the bird analogy. Someone compared that to poetry. Now, whether it was that eloquent or not, I don't know. But it's funny, sometimes I'll watch these playbacks back to make sure I don't sound like a total dumbass, and I'll be like, wow, that was spirit taking the reins there. They had a lot of influence there, because that's not me. It is, but you could tell that there's a definite influence or overshadowing there, which is nice. That's nice to know that I have help there, which is what we'll be talking about next week. Spirit guides, yay! Yes, Jill. Either, I would encourage you to try both approaches, though. As always, at the start of next week, we will start with questions from what we did that may have come up for you since last week. Trying to think of anything else. Yeah, just as a reminder, I know Jackie forgot that we've started an hour earlier than the very first one that we did. I think 7 works better for a lot of people, and I know it works better for myself, so I think I'm going to stick with 7 o'clock Eastern time every Monday from here on out, however long it takes. It may take 20 weeks. We'll get through everything, and we'll work at a pace that's comfortable, that people can digest and absorb. And so if you have questions about anything, hold on to them, and we'll start with those questions next week. Other than that, do your homework. If you don't, I will know, and I will see you then. Thank you, you guys.